I'm very pleased and honored indeed to introduce Professor Shaman Hatley for this week's Śākta lecture. Professor Hatley is Professor and Chair of Asian Studies at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. His research focuses on goddess cults and tantric rituals of medieval India, including the yogini cults and the early history of yoga. Amongst many things, his research has contributed greatly to our understanding of the significance of yogini temples in medieval India. He's also done important work on the technical terminology of the Śaiva tantras. Currently, he's preparing a monograph on the yogini cults of early medieval India, a multi-volume study and critical edition of the Bhairavatantras, one of the earliest surviving works of Śaiva tantric literature focused upon goddesses. So I'm very pleased indeed to welcome Professor Hatley to this Śākta lecture series. And today he will present us with a lecture on the Devīpurāṇas, tantric sources and adaptations of tantric ritual. So without further ado, I'll leave the word to you, Professor Hatley.
Thank you for that kind introduction. It's been many years since I could visit Oxford, and it may be many years still, but it's a pleasure at least to be able to visit virtually and to share some of my work with you. Thanks again for the kind invitation. Unique among first-millennium Puranas, the Devīpurāṇa reveals deep familiarity with Tantric Śaivism. This presentation analyzes several cases of the Devīpurāṇa's engagement with tantric rituals and sources, particularly, but not exclusively, from the Śākta or goddess-oriented Bhairavatantras. I will argue that its integration of these is integral to the construction of a goddess-centered civic religion, which appears to be the dominant concern of the text's redactors. Composed most likely in the 8th to 9th centuries, the Devīpurāṇa provides comparatively early and detailed testament to the making of public Śāktism. Features of what I mean by this include a scripturally authorized cult and theology centered upon the singular Mahadevi, calendrical civic rituals and festivals, including rites of state, and a class or classes of Śākta religious specialists, prominent among whom are those the Devīpurāṇa calls Devi Dvijas, that is, Śākta Brahmins. A religious formation of this kind became prevalent in the 2nd millennium, especially in eastern India. It is in the Devīpurāṇa, for example, that the tantric-influenced fully Śākta form of the Navaratra, the pan-Indic 9 nights festival of the goddess, finds its earliest exposition, as Bihani Shorkar shows in her book Heroic Śāktism. The Devīpurāṇa is also our principal textual source concerning the temple cult of the 7 mothers, the Saptamatris, which flourished across the subcontinent from the mid-1st millennium. Far more than a collection of narratives on the goddess's demon-slaying exploits, the Devīpurāṇa is a rich and highly eclectic document essential to understanding the early medieval religious landscape. Study of the Devīpurāṇa has suffered from the poor condition of the received text, which has discouraged historical scholarship in the years since R.C. Hadra's pioneering study published in 1963. No early manuscript appears to survive, and as Hazra notes, the extant Vulgate text appears to be shorter than the original. Many verses attributed to it in digests are missing. While printed twice, once in the late 19th century and again in the early 1970s, these 2 editions are of poor quality and make only limited use of regionally restricted manuscript evidence. My work on the text is based on the 2 published editions, as well as several manuscripts from archives in Nepal, Bengal, London, and Pune. Fortunately, there has been renewed interest in the Devīpurāṇa over the past several years, as reflected in recent publications and work in progress by scholars such as Florinda De Simini, James Pierce, Bihani Shorkar, Yuko Yokochi, and Olga Serbaeva Sarogi. Today, I will first outline evidence for the Devīpurāṇa's knowledge of Tantric Śaivism. The redactors refer to a variety of scriptural authorities and textual genres, including the Vedas, Vedanta, and Vedanga, and Shastras of Sankhya and Yoga, medicine, and astronomy. It also betrays knowledge of major branches of early Tantric Śaiva literature, There are multiple references to what are probably tantras of the mainstream Shaiva Siddhanta, referred to as Shivagama, Shiva Siddhanta, Siddhanta, and Shiva Jnana. Moreover, the Devīpurāṇa makes references to multiple genres of non-Siddhantika Tantra, the Bhuta, Bala, and Garuda Tantras, which represent different branches of the Shaiva medical tradition, Matri Tantras, these are presumably dedicated to the cult of mother goddesses, Matris and Yoginis, and possibly refer to early Śākta Tantras as a class. It makes reference also to Jyeshta Tantras, which potentially refer to Tantras of the Vamasrotas, and it also refers to the Bhairavatantras. There are also references to Buddhists who are Garudavadan, that is, practitioners of Tantric medicine, and Buddhists who worship the mother goddesses according to their own system, perhaps a reference to Buddhist Kriya Tantra material of the kind preserved in the Manjushriya Mula Kalpa, a text which, like the Devīpurāṇa, we can probably locate in eastern India in the 7th to 8th or 9th centuries. On the whole, the Devīpurāṇa's references to Tantric literature have an archaic feel, lacking the schematization of the mature tradition and emphasizing genres poorly represented in Indian manuscript collections, probably on account of having been superseded. The Devīpurāṇa does not name specific works of Tantric literature. Nonetheless, its knowledge of several sources can be inferred. These, too, suggest a comparatively archaic Tantric literary horizon. The most dramatic example is the Devīpurāṇa's silent incorporation of a long section of the Brahmayamala, one of the earliest surviving Śākta Bhairavatantras. As I show in my 2018 book, Chapter 119 of the Devīpurāṇa draws directly from Chapter 83 of the Brahmayamala, which narrates the origin of Bhairava's bone ornaments, skull bowl, and divine weapon, his trident-like skull staff, or Katwanga, which is made from the corpse of the obscure demon Kartvasura. This case provides the best evidence uncovered so far for the Devīpurāṇa's large-scale incorporation of Tantric textual material. The closest comparable case I am aware of is the Devīpurāṇa's adaptation of several sections of a non-Tantric Śaiva text, that is the unpublished Shiva Dharmottara of the so-called Shiva Dharma corpus. The Devīpurāṇa's reuse of text from this source, mainly on the subject of Vidyādana, the gift of knowledge, was first noticed by Hadra and studied in more detail recently by Florinda de Simini. Once a widely known authority, the Shiva Dharmottara may perhaps belong to the 7th century. Beyond these two examples, which involve whole-scale incorporation of long textual passages, there are a few other cases where it is possible to identify Tantric sources or to infer knowledge of such literature. Particularly notable is the Devīpurāṇa's account of Patala, the 7 netherworlds, in its 86th chapter. This belongs to a cycle of chapters on the demon Ruru, who at this point in the story has retreated from battle against the lethal goddess Kalaratri or Chamunda, and flees through the netherworlds in a desperate attempt to save his charma, his skin, and his munda, his head. Eventually, the goddess will bear these as trophies, hence her name Chamunda, a vernacular echo of Charma Munda. In describing the subterranean paradises that comprise Patala, the Devīpurāṇa reveals intimate knowledge of the cosmological teachings of the Guhya Sutra. This is a section of the highly influential Nishwasa Tattva Samhita, probably the earliest surviving Shaiva Tantra. Although presented in reverse order, the Devīpurāṇa's account of the netherworlds closely follows Chapter 5 of the Guhya Sutra, upon which it is likely based, whether directly or indirectly. Both accounts of Patala include the names of the netherworlds, their capital cities, presiding deities, and divine and semi-divine denizens. The names of the netherworlds and other details are unusual, virtually unique to the Guhya Sutra and to this section of the Devīpurāṇa. While the phrasing generally differs, one verse is nearly identical, and that's the one I've posted here on the slide. Devīpurāṇa 86, 3c to 4b. Kanchani chapuri yatra chitra chitravati cha tatra hartaka rudrastu vidyarvidyeshwarair vitaha. This is almost the same as Guhya Sutra, chapter 5, 16c to 17b. Yatra chitravati nama puri rudra samakula tatra sau hartako devo vidyavidyeshwarair vritaha. Minor differences in phrasing, but on the whole, I think the similarity is too much to be coincidental. Tellingly, this account of the netherworlds departs from the description of eight patalas provided earlier in the Devīpurāṇa in chapter 82. In this case, the Devīpurāṇa may instead follow the Swachanda Tantra, and here's the only case where its wording actually is almost the same as the passage from the Swachanda Tantra. While drawing on the Guhya Sutra, the Devīpurāṇa's redactors apparently took little trouble to harmonize their sources. Notably, in restricting itself to the netherworld realms of the Guhya Sutra, the Devīpurāṇa remains fully in the Puranic universe. That is to say, it avoids incorporating distinctive mantramarga cosmological ideas, such as the hierarchy of tattvas which constitute the pure universe, the Shuddhadvan, beyond the spheres of Prakriti and Maya. This is consistent with the Devīpurāṇa's engagement with the Brahmayamala, whose mantramarga cosmological teachings it recasts into a Puranic theistic idiom. I suspect that more evidence for the Devīpurāṇa's engagement with specific works of Tantric literature awaits discovery. A stray passage in chapter 85, also part of the Ruru cycle, suggests as much. This narrates the birth of four groups of four divine warriors, called grahas or Caesars, whom Shiva wills into being to aid the goddess Kalaratri in battle, and who arise in the four cardinal directions. Their names and their directional associations mostly correspond to the deities called Rakshasas, who occupy identical positions in the Brahmayamala's elaborate initiation mandala. And though not listed by name, the 24 yoginīs whom the Devīpurāṇa mentions in the same context may likewise intimate the 24 yoginīs who form the outer circuit of deities in the Brahmayamala's same mandala. Also, tacked on at the end of this passage, the Devīpurāṇa adds mention of four more male deities. These in fact correspond to similar deities of the Swachanda Tantra, who preside over the cremation grounds arrayed in the cardinal directions outside of its mandala. This allusion to deities of the Swachanda Tantra cannot be coincidental, for the same passage also makes passing reference to Swachanda Bhairava himself. While the redactors of the Devīpurāṇa do not reuse specific material from the Swachanda Tantra here, they certainly seem to know its pantheon. Notably, the works of Śaiva literature mentioned that the Devīpurāṇa alludes to or draws upon directly are comparatively archaic, almost certainly predating the 9th century and possibly or even probably the 8th. These sources span a wide cultic spectrum, from the lay Śaiva devotion of the Shiva Dharmottara to the Śākta and radically antinomian Brahmayamala. I see no sign of the Kala systems and literature that would come to the fore by the 10th century, if not earlier. And although it is still premature to assess the library of the Devīpurāṇa's redactors, the Śaiva sources and textual genres it knows do suggest what seems to be a pre-9th century horizon. The next issue I wish to examine here is the Devīpurāṇa's incorporation of tantric mantras and mantra practices. The first and most interesting case is that of a mantra expounded in chapter 9. This long dharani-like incantation invokes the goddess Chamunda and is called the Padamala Vidya, or word garland spell. This garland mantra, or mala mantra, strings together 32 discrete units, beginning with Om Namo Bhagavati Chamunde Namaha, and may be incanted as a whole or in part to accomplish various acts of tantric sorcery. Its ritual application evokes the milieu of tantric cremation ground sorcery, involving the most extreme of all ritual offerings, human flesh. This prescription is anomalous in the Devīpurāṇa and reveals probable derivation from a Vidyapita Bhairavatantras. And I should mention this is a subject which a doctoral student, Mary Ciccioni, is devoting significant attention to in her doctoral thesis in progress. Nonetheless, the finale to the chapter shifts to a lay devotional register, promising the more generic rewards of Puranic religion for those incanting or just listening to the Vidya: freedom from sin, warding off misfortune and disease, and merit. And I'll just read this concluding passage. The word garland spell, through a single utterance, dispels the sin of Brahminicide. Through incantation or listening, it bestows to people of all classes merit equal to lustration in all sacred fords, and the fruits of all votive rites. It quells all misfortune and wards off all diseases. One should not give this to someone who is not a devotee, to those who do not worship the goddess. This is a typical Puranic Shrutipala statement on the fruits of reciting or listening, usually reserved for the conclusion of narrative episodes. Just after reading about the need to offer fire sacrifice with human flesh, the shift is jarring, indicative of a poorly sutured juncture between the Devīpurāṇa's unknown tantric source and the voice of its own redactors. In addition to the word garland spell, the Devīpurāṇa devotes a chapter to another garland mantra, the famous 80-word Vyoma-Vyapi mantra of Shiva, which is found in texts of the early Śaiva Siddhanta, such as the Matanga Parameshvara. Taught in chapter 77 of the Devīpurāṇa, the mantra here is fully de-esotericized, incorporated into a program of worship of Shiva devoid of distinctly tantric elements, and aimed at attaining Shiva's heaven rather than liberation. Tacked on at the end of the Vyoma-Vyapi is a second tantric mantra system, this time dedicated to a goddess. While the text is laconic, the ritual context seems to be that of worship of the deity on the blade of a trident, or blades of a trident. The root mantra identifies the goddess as a Vajra-wielding form of Kali, the fierce goddess. What is so fascinating about this mantra is that variations on it resurface in later sources in rituals for empowering swords, enchanting swords. Furthermore, according to the Agni Purana, this is the very mantra incanted by the king at the climactic moment of the 9 nights festival, that is the Navaratra, at midnight of the 8th night, when the king performs animal sacrifice. So this is a powerful example of Śākta tantric mantras being repurposed as military magic and also for civic religious ceremonies, for which the Devīpurāṇa provides some of the earliest important evidence. A final example of the Devīpurāṇa's incorporation of tantric mantras is chapter 70's Raksha Vidhana, or Rite of Protection. This is directed towards Ganesha or Vinayaka, whose root mantra here is given as Om Vinayakaya Gom Namaha. Like the Kali mantra, this is inflected by derivation of 6 limb mantras: heart, head, crest, eyes, armor, and weapon in an entirely tantric manner. This set of mantras is installed in a colorful mandala or drawn on cloth or birch bark. I am not aware of a tantric source for this mantra, nor am I aware of its reuse in later sources and traditions. Whether or not borrowed from a tantric source, the mantra and ritual syntax are entirely those of the mantra marga. Its applications, however, are more diverse, including from making protective amulets to performance of rites of appeasement, shanti karman. The next case I wish to examine is the Devīpurāṇa's presentation of pilgrimage to the mountain goddesses Nandā and Sunandā. Located in Uttarakhand in the central Himalayas, Nandā Devi has been a site of pilgrimage and a royal cult for more than a millennium. Temples and inscriptions in the area date back to the 8th and 9th centuries, more or less the time of the Devīpurāṇa's composition. Pilgrimage to the main peak of Nandā forms the subject of chapter 93, while the shorter chapters 94 and 95 concern her sister Sunanda, the eastern peak. These together form the Nanda cycle of the Devīpurāṇa, or the Nanda Shastra, to use its own expression. There's really a lot to say about this cycle's lively, genre-bending narratives of magical adventure, which blend ritual prescriptions with fantasy, eros, and if I'm not mistaken, parody as well. Here I will leave aside the literary, however, and focus on the ritual. My observation is that the entire process of pilgrimage, yatra, has been reframed in the idiom of Tantric sadhana. More specifically, sadhana as envisioned in the Śākta Śaiva Bhairavatantras, characterized in part by emphasis on attaining magical encounters with goddesses, called melaka or melapa, meaning rendezvous or coming together. Nanda is a tantric goddess, that is to say, she's a mantra deity, and the pilgrim, presumed male, is referred to as a sadhaka or mantri, that is, an initiate who possesses mantras, and as Mahasattva or Mahavira, a tantric hero. This tantric pilgrimage begins at home with preliminary worship of the Shiva Linga. After receiving auspicious portents in dream, one commences to worship Nanda in one of several substrates, that is, her icon, her sandals, a sword, a trident, or a painted mandala or cloth. Worship is followed by 3 nights of mantra incantation, and then homa, fire sacrifice. Although this is not referred to as diksha, initiation, it loosely follows its structure, despite omissions, and despite the conflation of the roles of guru and disciple. The rites culminate in the pilgrim taking samayas, post-initiatory pledges. These echo the samayas of Śākta tantras in some respects, including a rule to feed and honor Śaiva ascetics and young girls. The samayas otherwise revolve around the veneration of women, injunctions never to beat or dishonor a woman, to protect women from assault, and to treat as holy tirthas the places where women bathe and draw water, all for the purpose of pleasing Nanda Devi. These pledges presage the goal of the ritual, which is to spend a lifetime in female company in Nanda's magical paradise. After taking the pledges, the sadhaka goes to one of several places sacred to Shiva and commences sadhana. Let's call this base camp, or phase 2. In period Shaiva sources, sadhana is a technical term for the post-initiatory ritual regimen by which a sadhaka achieves mastery over the mantra deity or his or her ritual manual, or kalpa, culminating in siddhi, success, synonymous with attaining extraordinary powers, or whatever the desired fruit is of the ritual. Nonetheless, here the ritual is combined with the decidedly non-esoteric practice of pradhana, that is, the offering of rice balls to the ancestors. It seems to me that there may be It seems to me that may be a substitute for the tantric Guru Pankti Yaga, veneration of the lineage of gurus. After in this way saving many generations of his family, the sadhaka finally heads north to the glorious temple of Nanda. Curiously, almost no attention is paid to the journey to the sacred mountain, though there is passing reference to the salvation that awaits those who die along the way. After reaching the temple of Nanda, which is also the site of her sacred pool or pond, the sadhaka again commences worship of the goddess. Now, we don't know for sure whether the structures that still survive are necessarily the ones that are envisioned in this source, because it doesn't, the Devīpurāṇa doesn't actually provide enough information to assess this. So after reaching the temple of Nanda, one commences worship of the goddess. Describing this ritual, the redactors shift from the more generic term puja, used earlier, to the more specifically tantric yajna or yaga. Nanda is a serene four-armed goddess dressed in white, carrying the veena, of the lute, making the gestures of protection and granting boons. She possesses a 9-syllable vidya mantra, a navakshara vidya, which has the usual ancillary or anga mantras, that is heart, head, crest, armor, and weapon. And these are inflections of the Vidya. She is worshipped in a simple mandala. Her entourage consists of the four sisters, Jaya, Vijaya, Ajita, and Aparajita. These are cult deities of the archaic Vamasrotas tantric system, but with Nandā, the goddess, supplanting the male deity Tumburu Bhairava in the center. Fittingly, Nandā holds Tumburu's characteristic emblem, the Veena. The sisters are installed in lotus petals in the cardinal directions, surrounded by the guardians of the directions. Nanda's mantric throne is visualized in the manner of Shiva's, with the deity Ananda at the base, the virtues of Dharma, Jnana, Vairagya, and Aishwarya as the four legs, and a white lotus seat for the goddess, created with the Pranava, Om. She is summoned with her root mantra, the Vidya, and given pure offerings of flowers, edibles, and so forth with great devotion. After completing worship, the sadhaka begins prolonged recitation of the goddess's Vidya mantra. Although the term is not used, this is a hallmark of Tantric Purashcharana or Purva Seva, the preliminary service that activates a mantra's power. And although the practice of nyasa, that is the placement of mantras on the body, is not mentioned, the sadhaka is nonetheless said to attain a body made of mantra. Mantra recitation must continue until the sadhaka attains a dream vision of a woman dressed in white clothing, the color of Nandā. This betokens his siddhi, the success of sadhana, directly echoing the ritual logic of the Bhairavatantras, where visionary encounters with female beings, especially yoginīs, signal the fruition of sadhana. Things then get rather weird. We begin to leave the prescriptive mode and enter a narrative of magical fantasy. The sadhaka is to circumambulate the Devi, and especially her sacred pond. Then, contemplating the goddess and overcoming his fear, he should dive into the water and swim below. There he finds an ornate door shaped like the face of a woman, the entrance to Nanda's paradise. In front of the door is an even more ornate jeweled pavilion where stand images of the goddess Nandā and her attendant Jaya. After he prostrates to Nandā, the image of Jaya speaks to him, saying, "Welcome, great hero. Remain here while I request the goddess to allow your entry." Presumably the sadhaka has by now transcended the need to breathe. Jaya pleads his case to Nandā, and the goddess's pratima, her image, joyfully assents, saying, "Let him in quickly. Since he holds my feet in his heart, he's in my heart too." Apsaras, that is celestial nymphs, and countless divine maidens, swarm out from the subterranean paradise to garland the sadhaka, offer him the guest water, and escort him inside, saying, "Welcome, great hero." They bring him to a jeweled pavilion outside the city of Nandapuri, and tell him to await the goddess. Beseeched by the maidens, Nanda Devi leaves her palace and comes to the gates in her lion-drawn chariot on a white lotus, attended by a procession of countless beautiful maidens, singing and dancing. She orders that the sadhaka be granted entry to the city, and when he enters and falls before her, she speaks to him. And I quote the passage in full. There are a number of little problems here, which I've tried to resolve in various ways. The goddess spoke. "Welcome, good man. May you be well. Tell me the boon you desire, devout one." The virtuous sadhaka, spoken to thus by the goddess, abandons his human body. Adorned with the ornaments of a Vidyadhara, he bears the brilliance of 1,000 morning suns, and is beautiful, fortunate, serene, valorous, and mighty. The goddess spoke. "This bejeweled city grants all wishes. O sadhaka, kindly sport here as it pleases you, until the time of universal destruction, becoming as powerful as Skanda." The sadhaka spoke. "Would that I shall be your devotee. free from the suffering of rebirth. The goddess spoke. I've given you 1 crore of maidens, O Sadhaka. 2 billion of the remaining maidens are kept ready. The virtuous Sadhaka saluted the feet of the goddess and left with the other Sadhakas, being lauded with benedictions. After Maheshwari, the Mahadevi, gave the Sadhaka a boon, she entered into her divine palace, one rare even among the gods. Afterwards, nothing could be heard in that most excellent city, due to the clamorous din of the maidens, the sounds of various musical instruments. The maidens embrace him like bees swarming a lotus. Having a variety of pastimes, surrounded by divine women, Sadhakas sport there until the time of universal destruction. Concluding the episode, Shiva promises that devotees of Nanda shall always have access to this harem, which is protected by water, the Himalayas, and guardian deities such as Chandranaga, and is difficult to attain even for the lords of Asuras. So while the Devīpurāṇa's scripted dialogues and fantastical boons may strike one as the run-of-the-mill masala of Puranic storytelling, these features in fact echo, perhaps even parody, depictions of divine encounters and magical attainments in early tantric literature. The entire Nanda cycle can be viewed in part as a creative exposition of Patala Siddhi, the power to enter a subterranean paradise, the opulent lands of the Asuras and Nagas. This is mentioned frequently as one of the Tantric Siddhis, but rarely expanded upon. One of the attractions of this power, if not its implicit purpose, is the prospect of erotic encounters with female Asuras. Being storytellers besides priests, the redactors of the Devīpurāṇa must have found the theme irresistible. This, I would suggest, is an example where the Devīpurāṇa's adaptation of tantric ritual takes a literary turn, becoming source material for narratives that blend the prescriptive and the fantastic. The final case I would like to review concerns how the Devīpurāṇa transforms the propitiation of yogini-like goddesses, tantric goddesses of the cremation grounds, into rituals to benefit the state. The Devīpurāṇa is the most important textual source that survives concerning the temple cult of goddesses known as the Saptamatris, the Seven Mothers. Material evidence of their cult is widespread in the second half of the first millennium. What I am concerned here with, however, is the emergence of a temple cult of yoginīs, a class of tantric deities rooted in earlier mother goddess cults. In the Vidyapita Bhairavatantras, such as the Brahmayamala, yoginīs are liminal deities of great power and potential danger, characterized by such qualities as therianthropism, that is, having animal faces, the power of flight, organization into kulas, matriarchal deity clans, and guardianship over esoteric knowledge. Their propitiation requires offerings of alcohol and flesh, typically in a cremation ground. Their cult belongs principally to the power-seeking sadhaka, and the early sources do not envision the veneration of yoginīs in temples. Yet temples dedicated to groups of yoginīs nonetheless were constructed by the late 9th and early 10th centuries. Erected in stone from Odisha to Madhya Pradesh, to the Madhya Pradesh-Rajasthan border on the west, and as far south as Tamil Nadu, these predominantly circular, open-air temples are architecturally unique in medieval India. They enshrine large pantheons of goddesses, typically 64 in number, as well as Shiva or Bhairava and various guardian deities. The temple's unusual form seems to translate into architecture the characteristic circular array of the inner deity circuit of a tantric mandala, a yogini chakra, a khichdi chakra. The Devīpurāṇa probably predates the yogini temples by half a century or more. It seems also to provide a unique antecedent to these temples, and is one of the most useful sources, in my view, for reconstructing the ritual functions. Chapter 50 of the Devīpurāṇa teaches an elaborate system for worship of the goddess Sarvamangala, the all-auspicious, in 60 forms. These goddesses correspond to the 60 years, the samvatsaras, of Jupiter's calendrical cycle, and are to be worshipped perpetually for the kingdom's prosperity and protection. Notwithstanding key differences, there are multiple ways in which this ritual program connects with subsequent yogini temples. The 60 goddesses are presented in 3 sets of 20, grouped according to the gunas of Prakriti. For each goddess, the text supplies an iconographic description as well as a brief ritual procedure distinctive to each goddess, specifying the appropriate offerings for worship and also for homa, fire sacrifice. Much attention is given to pratishta, the rites of installation for consecrating the goddesses in images initially, and also to the physical space housing their worship. I'm editing this chapter, but there's still much to understand. The spatial arrangement of the goddesses is not yet clear to me entirely, though the group is once called a Matri Chakra, that is, the circle of mother goddesses. Daily worship follows normative paradigms of puja and homa, with the addition of tantric mantras, with the rites and aims inflected according to the distinctive nature of each goddess. The goddess Aparajita, for example, is worshipped with offerings of sandalwood, kumkum powder, various milk products and foods, and also by making offerings to Brahmins and feeding and worshipping maidens. The goddess Kaushiki, a dark, fierce skull-bearer, receives the non-vegetarian offerings of bali and meat rice, garlands of black flowers, and fire offerings of frankincense and aloe wood. Such worship of the 60-fold Sarvamangala is sponsored by a wealthy patron, a yajamana, and directed by a tantric officiant, the acharya. The overwhelming concern with protection of the state, martial success, the quelling of natural calamities, and concern with making the land bountiful, alongside the considerable labor and wealth required to perform the rites, point towards royalty as the intended patrons. The chapter's concluding remarks highlight how thoroughly the goddess's worship is oriented towards the state's security and prosperity. And I'll just read this concluding passage. In a land where the goddesses always receive this worship, the clouds rain year long, the earth is full of grain, Brahmins are devoted to the sacrifice and Ishti rites, the cows of the land are full of milk, women are always chaste, servants are devoted to their masters, and there is never a calamity nor accidental death, O sage. The 60 feminine deities of the Devīpurāṇa are not designated as yoginīs, but with the more generic Devi, goddess. While they share much in common with yoginīs, there is also a critical typological difference. Animal-faced deities are almost entirely absent. There are nonetheless multiple key ways in which the Devīpurāṇa's goddesses connect unambiguously to tantric yoginīs and to the yoginīs enshrined in temples. First is the inclusion of the 7 mothers, who are the clan mothers of yoginīs in early tantric sources, and who feature in most pantheons of 64 yoginīs, either as members of the group or as clan matriarchs of 8 yogini octads. The Devīpurāṇa does not organize its 60 goddesses into mother goddess clans, but does give prominent places to Brahmi and Chamunda. I see 2 potential grounds for connecting the Devīpurāṇa's pantheon to the 7 mothers and viewing it as an expansion of the 7 mothers. First, the 60 goddesses are referred to once as a Matri Chakra, that is the circle of mother goddesses. Like the expression Matri Mandala, this may or may not refer to a spatial arrangement, because Chakra and Mandala in this context can simply be plural markers, meaning group. But the language nonetheless suggests both links the goddesses to the Matris and Yoginis, and suggests the possibility of a circular configuration. Second, the group of 60 goddesses is, like the 7 mothers, joined by two particular male gods, the elephant-headed Ganesha and Shiva as Vinodhara, the lute-bearer, here called Dumbru Bhairava. Hence, as with many yogini sets, the Devīpurāṇa's 60 goddesses incorporate the 7 mothers, as well as their specific associated male deities, and might potentially be arrayed in a circle. Another key connection is that the Devīpurāṇa's 60 goddesses became the basis for a set of 64 yoginis in Lakshmi Dhara's Kritya Kalpataru. This massive Brahminical digest, or Nibandha, was likely composed in the Gahadavala court of Govindachandra in Benares or Kannauj in the early to mid-12th century. Its account of 64 yoginis in the Pratishta Kanda, the book on consecration of religious images, is simply an expansion of the Devīpurāṇa's 60 devis, reusing text from this Purana as its basis, while stripping away their ritual context. From the perspective of Lakshmidhara, who must have been familiar with yogini temples, the Devīpurāṇa's goddesses were yoginis in all but name. So as noted earlier, the Devīpurāṇa attests knowledge of a range of tantric scriptures and scriptural genres. Unlike the later Agni Purana, which is more or less a tantric digest masquerading as a Purana, the Devīpurāṇa's tantric adaptations are selective. These fit within patterns exemplified by the cases analyzed here. Its transformations of tantric yoginis into guardians of the state offers a particularly dramatic example, though mother goddess veneration had long straddled the divide between esoteric and popular religion, the worlds of Tantra and Purana, respectively. The Devīpurāṇa nonetheless seems to play a crucial role in the process of de-esotericizing tantric yoginis, anticipating and even providing a template for their public worship in temples. In other cases, the Devīpurāṇa repurposes tantric mantras to the aims and idioms of civic religion. Shiva's Vyomavyapi mantra, for example, is fully de-esotericized, incorporated into a program of worship devoid of distinctive tantric elements and aimed at attaining Shiva's heaven. Even in the case of Chamunda's Padamala Vidya, the word garland spell, which is used for tantric sorcery at its most transgressive, the Devīpurāṇa shifts at the end to a devotional register, promising freedom from sin, misfortune, and disease, and the accumulation of merit. In addition to its transformations of tantric ritual, the Devīpurāṇa also tantricizes lay rituals. The case of pilgrimage to the mountain goddesses Nandā and Sunandā is the best example of this, perhaps. Here we find the various stages of tantric mantra sadhana grafted onto the stages of pilgrimage, with the practitioner becoming a sadhaka and the mountain goddesses becoming mantra deities. So in these and in other cases, we find that the Devīpurāṇa consistently adapts tantric ritual, cosmology, and soteriology to Puranic idioms and rites. Spiritual liberation is reduced to going to heaven, powerful spells become hymns of divine praise, the propitiation of mantra deities becomes puja, and awe-inspiring liminal female deities become guardians of state. These transformations, the ways in which the Devīpurāṇa adapts tantric ritual, are integral to the making of goddess-centric civic religion, the public Śāktism, which was so influential in the second millennium in and beyond Eastern India. Thank you.